Serbs are behind wokeness. Over the years, Serbs were accused of many things, but this is one of the most ridiculous accusations I ever saw. Reminds me of a joke that Serbs caused dinosaurs' extinction. Now some Americans are blaming Serbs for woke ideology. Trump supporter is trying to connect woke left Democrats with Serbian nationalism. Unfortunately for him, Serb nationalists are often pro-Trump. Andrew Nutting is economics professor writing for Tablet magazine. I'm going to analyze his article. It's rather long, so I will skip some parts. The author mentions how Serb nationalists inspired both extreme far-right and far-left. Wow, Serb nationalism inspires everyone! Sarcasm. What is the truth? Serbian far-right has real connections with international far-right groups. There are no known ties between Serb nationalists and far-left. Why does the author claim otherwise? It's all about Milosevic. Western media usually portrays Milosevic as far-right. In reality, Milosevic was a member of Communist Party and later founded Socialist Party of Serbia, SPS for short. During the 1990s, it is true that some foreign leftist writers and politicians took Milosevic's side. But they were more exception than rule. The author says that Milosevic's nationalism wasn't simple chauvinism. In the years following the 1980 death of Yugoslavian dictator Josip Broz Tito, arguing that Serbs had been unjustly victimized by centuries of occupation and enslavement under the Ottoman Empire, followed by the highest per capita death count of any country in World War I, and then by genocide at the hands of Nazi-sponsored Croats during World War II. Serb nationalists further alleged that half Croat, half Slovene Tito had concocted a political system that discriminated against Serbs because he thought a strong Yugoslavia required a weak Serbia. This has nothing to do with Milosevic. Indeed, Serbs were enslaved under Ottoman Empire. Indeed, Serbia had the highest per capita death count of any country in World War I. Indeed, during World War II, Ustaša killed Serbs. Now, I think the author was misleading about Tito comments. Milosevic never renounced Tito and Yugoslav partisans. His voters often saw Milosevic as new Tito. Actual far-right in Serbia sees Milosevic as soft and weak. Historian Milorad Ekmečić said to the 1992 meeting of the Congress of Serbian Intellectuals, "In the history of the world, only the Jews have paid a higher price for their freedom than the Serbs, and that Serbs faced a struggle for biological survival." Minus the glowing reference to Jews, Ekmečić's rhetoric could easily find a place in the work of quite a few high-profile MacArthur Genius Grant recipients of recent years. Milorad Ekmečić was one of the best historians of his generation. Ekmečić was also a member of Yugoslav partisans. He joined the partisans after Ustaša killed 78 members of his extended family, Prebilovci massacre. Western observers of the 1990s Yugoslav wars were well aware of this Serb nationalist emphasis on long-time persecution and suffering and tended to find it despicable. Christopher Hitchens savaged it as Serbia's combination of arrogance and self-pity. Biden said Serbs stewed in the disease that they are the oppressed. Schwartz wrote of ethnic narcissism, and diplomat Richard Holbrooke boasted of telling Serb leaders to stop interrupting peace negotiations with historical bullshit. Can Biden, Holbrooke, Hitchens or Schwartz look someone like Ekmečić in the eye and say that 78 dead family members don't matter? That it's historical bullshit? People alive in 1990s were often World War II orphans. Many Serbs volunteered to fight in order to avoid repetition of World War II mass killings of Serbs. The author explains how Bosnian Muslims were seen as privileged ones in Ottoman Empire. Fact, all Muslims in Ottoman Empire had privileged status. The author says that Bosnian Muslims were seen as equivalent to white oppressors in woke ideology. Actually, the main problem was Izetbegović's Islamic philosophy. In 1970, Izetbegovic published a manifesto entitled The Islamic Declaration, expressing his views on relationships between Islam State and society. The manifesto was banned by the government. Just to point out, this happened while Tito was still alive. The declaration remains a source of controversy. Serbs who were opposed to Izetbegovic often quoted the declaration as indicative of an intent to create Iranian-style Islamic Republic in Bosnia. Izetbegovic defenders claim that this isn't true, that he was misunderstood. Former Naval War College professor John Schindler wrote that Ali Izetbegovic, the first president of Bosnia and practicing Muslim, had written passages about Ottoman rule that were tantamount to white southern politician who publicly extolled his slave-owning ancestors. The author claims that Serbs had triumphant mentality between 1918 and 1941. This triumphant mentality is manifested in the 45-foot-tall Belgrade statue, the Victor, dedicated in 1928, which remains one of Serbia's most prominent landmarks. The Victor's Serbian pobednik is one of Belgrade's symbols, not Serbian symbols. The statue was made by Croat artist Ivan Meštrović. Far-right Serbs want to remove this statue. This means that the Victor wasn't a symbol of any triumphant mentality among Serbs. Coincidentally or not, American Marxist academics began championing the racial branch of wokeness known as the critical race theory in the late 1980s, at the same moment when Milosevic was using Serb nationalism and a series of well-timed angry mobs to stage a hostile takeover of Yugoslavia's political institutions. Perhaps word travels fast in Marxist circles. Major problem with this statement is that Milosevic never had racial theories. Serb nationalism is about being better than everyone else, including British, French, and German. It's not about skin color. Cultural Marxism, which replaces theories of bourgeois proletariat class, conflicts with theories of ethnic, racial, and other identity-based conflicts as the motors of history. I would say that money wealth is behind every conflict in the history. The author says that Milosevic used Marxist-Leninist jargon instead of ethnic slurs. Why would Milosevic use ethnic slurs? Yugoslavia wasn't 1950s USA where politicians used N-word. Legendary Yugoslavian anti-communist dissident Milovan Đilas explained Milosevic's reinvention by quipping Yugoslavia is the laboratory of all communism. Đilas was a communist who turned against Tito. Conspiracy theory says that Đilas was fake opposition to Tito, because otherwise Tito would have killed Đilas. Đilas was wrong about Yugoslavia being a laboratory of all communism. Due to language barriers, Yugoslav communist authors had very limited impact on the foreign left. Đilas was probably the only Yugoslav political writer who was famous outside Yugoslavia. The author often equals communism and wokeness. I think it's wrong. Communism is about protecting the working class. Majority of people belong to the working class. Woke movement is about minorities, racial, ethnic, religious, sexual, gender. Serbs in Yugoslavia felt as oppressed majority, not oppressed minority. Serbs were the biggest ethnic group in Yugoslavia. In 1991, Serbs made 36.2% of total population in Yugoslavia. The next biggest group were Croats with 19.7%. Republican Trump supporters see themselves as oppressed majority. The author mentioned supposed tactics that are common for Serb nationalists and woke Americans. Glorifying the year of enslavement as the beginning of a national narrative. The author compares New York Times 1619 project with Serbs celebrating the 1389 Kosovo battle defeat. The 1619 is the year when the first slave ships arrived to America from Africa. Many foreigners don't understand what Serbs are celebrating. No, we are not celebrating defeat. We are celebrating martyrdom of Serbian Prince Lazar. Prince Lazar decided to fight against the Ottomans even though he was aware he was going to lose. I would compare it to making the last stand in Alamo, 1835. Americans who celebrate Alamo are proud of heroism of Davy Crockett and his friends. In 1989, Serbs marked 600 years since Kosovo battle. Many foreigners wrongly connect this to Milosevic. Whoever was Serbian leader in 1989 had to mark the anniversary. In 1889, Serbs marked 500 years since the battle. Public festivities included coronation of King Aleksandar Obrenović. I can guarantee that Serb leader in 2089 will mark 700 years since the battle. Attributing sinister ethnically based motivations and ideologies to political opponents, members of Congress like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley and Cory Bush regularly leave political opponents flummoxed with accusations of racism, white supremacy and anti-blackness. Insulting political opponents is a normal thing. Republicans use woke in pejorative meaning. Calling opposition and criticism violence in order to legitimize future actual violence. Again, very common thing in the politics. American far-right promises violence if anyone goes against violates the Constitution. The reality of wokeness is the promotion of tribal hatreds. It is tribal hatred even when, as in the case of many urban white Westerners, it involves hating one's own ostensible tribe, a circumstance that similarly applies to Boston Muslims, whose European heritage complicates whether they qualify as good Muslims or as bad white people. Tribal hatreds exist all over the world. They are not unique for the Balkans. Bosnia then serves as an important window as to whether wokeness is fundamentally an ideological or tribal phenomenon. More importantly, it shows wokeness' endgame. The author predicts the Balkanization partition of USA and future war that would start by the woke movement. He says that woke movement is spreading in Europe. I have to disappoint him. Extreme far left existed in Europe for decades. Italy had Red Brigades and Germany had Baader-Meinhof Group. Both were far left militant groups. There are also radical feminist organizations like Femen from Ukraine. They are best known for showing their naked breasts in public. None of these movements were inspired by Milosevic or by Serbian nationalism. Matters become far more grave when you realize that elements of the United States government are using the country's cultural and political hegemony to convince masses of incoming migrants to think of local Americans and Europeans the same way rampaging Serbian Chetnik death squads thought of the Muslims they spent large chunks of the 1990s brutalizing and killing. So basically, USA government is going to use illegal migrants to kill American citizens. This is pure Balkan-level conspiracy theory. We like to blame CIA, Illuminati, Satanists for everything that happens. Concerning Chetnik death squads, Americans believe that war in Bosnia was one-sided and that the Bosnian Muslims had no weapons, no paramilitary groups. So Bosnian Muslims were just sitting around and waiting to be killed. In reality, it was a three-way civil war between Bosnian Muslims, Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats. Bosnian Muslims lost 30,000 soldiers and 31,000 civilians. Bosnian Serbs lost 21,000 soldiers and 4,000 civilians. What do I think? USA was polarized during Civil War 1861-1865. The woke movement is not homogeneous. Pro-LGBT groups fight among each other over many issues. I am not sure how much Black Lives Matter movement cares about non-black LGBT. I would say that each group has their own priority agenda. I do think that Second American Civil War is just a matter of time. It could happen in 30 years or in November 2024. Fun fact, in former Yugoslavia, Slovenes were closest to so-called woke ideas. Slovenes were all about LGBT rights, environment, freedom of speech. No one ever described Serbs as woke.